Hey, listeners, this is Katya. I just wanted to let you know really quickly before the show starts how grateful we are to all of you who have already pledged money to help us make On the Media. We literally can't do this without you, so thank you. And if you've yet to give, it's really easy. Just go to onthemedia.org/donate or text the letters OTM to the number 69866, 69866. Look, it's been a challenging year, but we've gotten through it together. And with your support, we'll do it all again next year. Thank you.
I'm Brooke Gladstone. This week, 4 more officials were charged in connection with the Flint, Michigan water crisis, bringing the total number of people charged to 13. But the people of Flint had already been drinking the poisoned water for almost 2 years before the story finally got the national spotlight. Here's the background. In late 2013, Flint, a city in such dire financial straits that it had an emergency manager in charge, decided to cut ties with Detroit's costly water system. But the new system Flint had chosen wouldn't be ready for 2 years. So in April of 2014, the city tapped the Flint River. 4 years later, E. coli was detected. The treatment, chlorine, brought other problems, as residents told Michigan Public Radio.
My eyes are burning in the shower, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like what's going on? I get out the shower and I can't see for a minute.
I lost a bunch of hair. At one point, I had lost all my eyelashes. I still wear fake eyelashes because my eyelashes did not grow back what they were before.
Even the local General Motors plant stopped using the tap water because it was damaging their car parts. And even worse, it was eating away at lead pipes.
Researchers at Virginia Tech, they've analyzed hundreds of samples of Flint water, and what they found, it's shocking. Some samples contain lead levels high enough to meet the EPA's definition of toxic waste.
The team is led by Professor Mark Edwards, who started testing in Flint this summer at the urging of water activists. Hundreds of samples gathered citywide. They're even warning of lead poisoning in children and pregnant women. When we asked city officials about that, they said the water is safe and that it meets all state and federal guidelines.
Denial, despite mounting evidence from water researchers, a pediatrician, and a muckraker from a nonprofit advocacy group filling the role of local journalist. That muckraker, Kurt Guyette, helped expose the disaster with a cadre of Flint residents and water experts. Last January, I asked him what brought him there.
I was hired under a grant with the specific purpose of investigating and writing about Michigan's emergency manager law. And because Flint was under the control of an emergency manager, I started looking into what was going on there, especially when the water issue began to erupt.
Now, before we get to the water, let's talk about the emergency manager rule. That's what happens to communities when they get into financial trouble. They go under state control. In other words, they are no longer electing the officials that govern them.
Correct. They do continue to vote for city council and mayor, but those elected officials effectively have no real power whatsoever. All the power is consolidated into the hands of an appointed so-called emergency manager who has really unfettered authority. They're only responsible to the governor that appoints them, and they can do whatever they want. They can break collective bargaining agreements. They can sell off city assets, break city ordinances, create new ones. Really, the only thing that the law specifies that they can't do is miss a bond payment. So the banks get paid no matter what.
And the municipalities that end up getting governed in this way are, by definition, composed of poor people. These are poor communities. They're often African-American communities.
Almost without exception, the communities and school districts that have fallen under this law are majority African American. So there's very much a racial component to this as well as a class component.
Now, getting to the water, brownish, smelly water started coming out of the taps. City and state officials continued to deny it. And last spring, the emergency manager even said that really this was a perception problem for Flint. Then in June, you got a leaked memo from the EPA and an interview with the author, and that was a turning point, right?
At least it was the first crack in the dam of cover-up that the state and city were engaged in. Miguel del Toro is his name. He was contacted by a resident of Flint, went to Flint, inspected her house to make sure that there was no lead plumbing inside the house, because city tests had found very, very high lead levels, and city officials were trying to say it was because of the plumbing in their home. The city, using state protocol, was using a number of procedures that were guaranteed to skew the results low. They would instruct people who were providing samples to flush their systems the night before and take the first draw sample in the morning, guaranteeing that it would be the cleanest, freshest water that was not sitting for extensive period of time in these lead service lines and soaking up the lead. And that's just one of the things that they were doing. Del Toro wrote the memo saying this isn't an isolated incident. The problem is that the river water is so much more corrosive than the Detroit water. And on top of that, the state had made the decision to stop applying the kind of corrosion control chemicals that Detroit was using. So at the same time that the Flint River started to be used much, much more corrosive, inexplicably the decision was made to stop using corrosion control.
You had this memo, and you repeatedly asked the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality for a comment about it. Their emails discussing your request have been made public. I have a quote. "This is what Kurt Guyette has been calling about, by the way. Apparently it's going to be a thing now." And through FOIA requests, you also found that the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality edited a report on Flint's tap water by deleting 2 of the worst testing sites.
The bottom line is that all of their actions were intentionally designed in order to make sure that they remained under the federal action level. When you exceed the federal action level, you have to start paying to replace those, which is very, very expensive. And then they took these distorted tests and used it to try to assure people that they shouldn't believe their own eyes and noses, that the water was filthy and not drinkable.
So what questions now do you have left?
Now I'm focused on finding out what role the governor and his office did play in making the decision to use the river, and also when that decision was made, what basis it was made on. What did they know about the river? Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech said anybody with even basic knowledge about these kinds of things could look at what the river was like and know that this crisis was entirely predictable. It's just too corrosive. That definitely should have been known beforehand.
I think one of the emails about you that was floating around inside of the Michigan state government had to do with the fact that you couldn't really be objective because you were an activist and you'd created a film about the crisis and so on. What do you say to that?
One of the emails has me as a reporter with quote marks around the word reporter. You know, I really don't care what they think of me. When you have the documents, when you have the testimony, it really doesn't matter what they think.
I found it curious when we were first looking into what you did, is that the ACLU calls your position investigative reporter instead of investigator. Is that a distinction without a difference, or was there something intentional about that?
No, that is a distinction with an important difference. You know, investigators provide information to the organization that they're working for. My main job is to provide information to the public. You know, digging up information, but then conveying it in a way that is understandable, in a way that is compelling.
I'm just wondering, could you have reported this story at a traditional news outlet?
I worked at alternative papers for most of my life, and you know how much of a struggle it has been for them financially. By the time I left the paper that I was working at, I had no budget whatsoever for filing FOIA requests. Under the grant, I had a very generous grant.
You mean in your current position?
Yeah. I had a lot of resources at my disposal, the incredible luxury of time to really be able to dig into complicated, research-heavy issues like this. And so, no, there's no way that I would have been able to do it at an alternative paper or a small or mid-sized daily mainstream newspaper.
You know, one of the things we always hear is the media are ignoring this and the media are ignoring that. And sometimes it's frustrating because people usually have heard about that story from somewhere in the media. But this crisis really did take a long time to get attention. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think that there's a number of reasons. I talked about this with my coworkers when it was going on after the memo had come out. And Michigan Radio did an excellent job of following up, but otherwise there was a lot of silence. And I told them sometimes the bigger the story is, the longer it takes to get traction. Accusing the government of poisoning a town is a pretty significant charge to be making. And I think that a lot of people are reluctant to report something that is really almost unimaginable. We would not be sitting here talking about this now were it not first and foremost about the relentless efforts on the part of Flint citizens who refused to believe the lie their government was telling them that their water was safe. And so they found Miguel del Toro at the EPA. They found Mark Edwards at Virginia Tech. They found me at the ACLU of Michigan. And together, it was really a unique collaboration to expose this catastrophe.
Kurt, thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Kurt Guyette is an investigative reporter for the ACLU of Michigan. Thanks for listening to this On the Media Podcast Extra. Coming up on The Big Show, which will be posted on Friday, we're going to talk about all the things that Obama will do and what he should do before he leaves the White House. I'm Brooke Gladstone.